All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming to Talks at Google. We have an amazing guest for you today, Adam Braun. Adam started an organization in 2008 called Pencils of Promise, which a lot of you might have heard of. They've gone all around the world and started schools in impoverished regions. They've started over 400 schools to date. He's actually the New York Times bestselling author of The Promise of a Pencil. And he recently just started his newest venture, which is incredibly exciting. It's trying to basically upend the traditional college system and end the cycle of debt, teach students practical skills. It's a one-year program. It's really exciting. And he's here, and that's mainly what we're going to be focused on. Can't wait to have Adam speak. He's a perfect example of somebody who kind of embarked on a non-traditional path that's purpose-driven at a young age. And he's going to talk about where education is headed and what MissionU's place is in that. And that's what I just described, his new venture. So please join me in welcoming Adam Braun to the stage.
Thank you so much. As you heard, I spent really the last decade of my life focused on education, both internationally and now more so domestically. And so I figured I'd walk you a little bit through that journey and kind of open up today's talk with a little bit more context, in particular on MissionU, and then we can dive into some questions and then really open it up to Q&A with all of you. So to begin with, this is a community in rural Ghana. Pencils of Promise began in 2008. I put $25 into a bank account in hopes of building one school, and that first school was in rural Laos. Over time, what I saw was that not only did I have a personal passion for attempting and really guiding, I think, communities, in particular communities of poverty in rural parts of the developing world, to enable their future generations of children to gain access to better education, but that idea really resonated with a lot of people. In particular, young people across the country. And so what started in rural Laos grew to Nicaragua and Guatemala, eventually Ghana. And this was a community that I entered with some of our staff. And what we saw was that about 800 people lived in this community. And this was considered the school for the entire village. So you can imagine, obviously these children were not getting access to the quality of education that we would all want for them. And with the support of actually a school in the United States in Chicago that put together a peer-to-peer fundraiser, we were able to raise the funds to go and work with this community directly to really transform the lives of those children. And it transformed from this into this, which is what a completed Pencil of Promise school looks like. And I spent a lot of time over this last decade going, really not only around the country but around the world, speaking about this work, trying to really galvanize others to get involved in this process. And fortunately, the organization has grown by leaps and bounds. It's really found tremendous success. The next step for me in 2013 is we started to approach what felt like a very big milestone, which was completing our 100th school, which actually was in Ghana as well. I decided to write a book about it, and that book was called The Promise of a Pencil. What was really important was actually the subtitle of the book, which is how an ordinary person can create extraordinary change. And so, as much as I felt, really inspired by the work that we were taking on, my real goal was actually to help other people figure out how they could pursue their sense of purpose and their sense of passion. And so the book is framed around 30 very short chapters. Each chapter is titled with a mantra, and those mantras were really the guideposts for me as I navigated the challenging waters of figuring out how do you build a global organization from scratch, in particular starting in late 2008 in New York, which was an incredibly challenging period. That subtitle, How an Ordinary Person Can Create Extraordinary Change, is what motivated me. And I found myself on many, many college campuses around the country. And as I would tell this story, there was certainly a subset of people that would actively get involved. And they'd tell their friends, they'd tell their family. And as a result, this organization continued to grow in recent years. And as of today, we've now built over 400 schools around the world. We have about 75,000 students in our programs. And what started with just $25 has now turned into more than $50 million raised to support these children around the world. But as I went from location to location to location, really speaking about the value and virtue of this work, what I found was a common refrain on every type of college campus that I visited, whether these were elite private schools, community colleges in Tennessee and Arizona, large state schools, non-elite private schools. There was always this significant subset of students that would come up to me afterwards or ask a question during Q&A, and they'd say, Adam, this is really great what you're describing, but I can't even consider the type of work that you're describing because, one, I have so much student debt that the number one thing in my life is trying to get out of that student debt. And then two, I don't actually have any of the skills that are going to help me get the jobs that I'm seeking. And I'm now hearing this as I apply for internships and jobs. And so I started to do a lot of research into some of these challenges. And I deeply believe in organizational focus. And so Pencils of Promise needed to stay true to its core mission to support children in the developing world. But there was a huge personal transition for me when I met my wife. And at the time, you start to fall in love with somebody, you start planning a life together, and one of those important conversations is to figure out where you're coming from financially. And what was very clear to me, from really the first month that we spent together, was that she was from a very loving family, but one without a lot of financial means. And they came to this country when she was 9 from South Africa, moved to the Boston area in hopes of really building a life of success and prosperity. And if you're new to this country in particular, or you're of a working class or lower income family, what's the number one thing that every parent tells you you should invest in, that you should focus on to get a better life ahead? Education, right? And I think that's a dream that we've really kind of sold to generation after generation. On my mother's side, my grandfather actually was part of the first wave of individuals to get access to free college in the United States through the GI Bill, which was passed in 1944. And it really started this movement towards college for all. But my wife bought into that, and she went to college initially out of state. After 2 years, transferred back in state to try and reduce the cost. And after 3 years, needed to leave school before actually attaining that bachelor's degree that she was pursuing because the challenges were so great financially. And by the time that I met her, her student debt was at over $100,000 as a result of these 3 years. And it was absolutely crushing. And eventually, as we moved towards marriage, I said, you should really consider declaring full bankruptcy. You should hopefully, I know it's going to destroy your credit, but I have good credit, we'll be okay as a couple. And at least you'll be, out of this cage that might keep you in poverty throughout the rest of your life. And she said to me, Adam, that sounds great, but student debt is the only debt in the United States that you cannot declare bankruptcy on. And I remember, I have a financial background, started my career at Bain, been working at hedge funds since I was like 16. I was like, that's not possible. That's just impossible. Let me talk to some financial people and help you get out of this. And of course, she was absolutely right, and I was absolutely wrong. And as soon as I really discovered that, I think that in at least my mind, that's the moment that MissionU was born. That if we had a societal injustice that was this great, this profound, and the one thing that was supposed to enable the people who needed to experience social mobility most was going to keep them in those places or worse, then we're creating a greater and greater societal divide between the classes, which obviously leads us to this huge political division and all these other challenges that we're now facing as a country. And so I said, I need to research this more. And I'll show you, a chart that a friend of mine, Neil Blumenthal, sent me a few months ago. Neil's the co-founder and co-CEO of Warby Parker, and someone who's also passionate about this because he's seeing it on his team. Some of the challenges, right, of finding work-ready talent, especially out of undergrad. And so this is the price change in consumer goods over the last 20 years or so. And what you can see is at the bottom, things like software, toys, new cars, clothing, et cetera, essentially luxury consumer goods, have actually drastically come down. Much more people can access them than ever before. What you see at the very top is that education has never been more expensive. And even more expensive than traditional education is college tuition. It's risen more than essentially any other incurred fee that someone's going to take on in their life. As I started to dig further and further into this, what I realized was that not only do you see this huge growth, the red line, in the cost of getting an undergraduate degree, but the blue line is the average earnings of a bachelor degree holder between the ages of 24 and 34. And so that's actually gone down. And so, what we have is, one, this situation where any person who's entering college and has to take on debt, that number is just increasing, and now it's becoming oftentimes insurmountable. Today's entering freshmen will have on average $50,000 of debt by the time they graduate, if they graduate, and only a much lower percentage than we actually anticipate graduate. And then two, they actually don't have the skills that they need, right? About 3/4 believe that their college has failed to prepare them for the real world. And so there's three macro shifts that I observed in really 2016 into 2017, and now here we are in 2018, that would enable a very new model for us to really kind of recreate, reinvent, and reinvigorate this very oftentimes averse to change space of higher ed. And so the first is, historically credentials were really the metric for success. People just said, okay, do you have a degree? Yes, then you must be skilled. Because we didn't have all this other information on an individual. You couldn't search for them on Google. You couldn't look up their LinkedIn credentials 10 or 15 years ago. So we're now seeing this shift over to competency-based hiring, right? In particular for technical skills, you can just put a test in front of somebody and you can assess their technical abilities, and that's actually much more important than perhaps whether they have a degree or not. The second is that historically tests were the primary method of learning, right? We did rote memorization, and then after that rote memorization, then we just jumped into like an exam and we regurgitated that, and that was a demonstration of learning. And I think that what we are seeing a radical shift to is project-based learning, where it's much more replicable to put together a group of projects that a person actually navigates through in a group, and that in itself is a lot more demonstrative of what we actually experience in the real world. In our work contests. And then the third is that in 2012, we saw the rise of MOOCs like Coursera and Udacity. There was this huge belief that we're going to have the best professor in the world who's going to educate 15,000 people, and that's going to solve the challenges of education. And what we're seeing is that the vast majority of people don't actually complete those courses. It's less than 5%. Most of us are not considered autodidacts, that we can teach ourselves and have that motivation and accountability to complete one of those courses. And so what we are able to do, though, is work very effectively in online cohorts when it's live, synchronous instruction. When there's an instructor, a world-class expert in something with a small group, and we're held accountable to those around us on the screen, and it's done live. That's actually very, very powerful. We've seen a few models evolve in that space that are able to demonstrate that. And so, really the start of 2016, I moved from New York after replacing myself as CEO at Pencils of Promise, out to the Bay Area to focus on building a college alternative for the 21st century, really reinventing the model of what higher education can and should look like if you started from today. And so I'll show you a quick video. It features some really extraordinary people that have gotten behind what we're doing, and it walks you a little bit through why this works and how it works.
For the first time in history, the skills you need for work, learning, and citizenship have converged.
The current process of academia is failing us in our ability to find great talent.
There is a gap now in what students are learning and what employees are expecting in the market.
There's a lack of sort of specific practical experience.
The traditional four-year curricula is missing a lot of the technical skills that people need.
They might not have collaboration skills, project management skills. They're not prepared to work.
You just want to make sure that the experience that someone has is relevant to the job that they have to do.
I'm excited about MissionU because the team has been reaching out to folks like me to figure out what are we looking for in candidates and helping to design the curriculum around that.
I love people that take not just ideas and theory, but they show real concrete examples.
You want people who can work with other people, who have great soft skills. You want hard skills, right? The ability to analyze problems. That's what MissionU is teaching.
The student who's aggressive about taking on things is exactly the type of candidate we would want to bring in to our company. Analytical, problem solvers, and not afraid of something tough.
That's why I think MissionU's focus on skills is so important.
It's one thing to learn something in a classroom, but it's a whole nother thing to have real-world experience in a specific field.
One truly learns by doing.
Having somebody that's been specifically trained in an area where we need talent is of real value.
Building a company, we set out to challenge norms, and so of course we should be empowering people to do the same thing with their own educations. We would definitely hire a MissionU graduate.
Of course I would hire someone from MissionU.
We would 100% hire a MissionU graduate.
I would be very confident about hiring someone from MissionU.
We would and we will hire MissionU grads.
1,000% I would hire a MissionU grad.
I would totally hire someone from MissionU.
We would like to be the first people to hire MissionU grads.
I would absolutely hire MissionU grads.
So MissionU in essence is this one-year program that focuses on real-world skills. And one of the things that we've certainly seen is that it's not enough just to teach hard technical skills, but people that really thrive actually possess this whole wealth of soft skills, effective collaboration, critical thinking abilities, effective communication, both in written, whether it's email or building presentations or in person. And so, we also thought about what is a actual viable revenue model for a modern institution that aligns itself with the outcomes and the aspirations of their students from day one. And so what we decided was that before any student ever paid us $1 of tuition, we would have to demonstrate to them that they had achieved success, which is really the exact opposite of what happens on a traditional college today, right? You take out these big loans, you pay this school, and then you kind of hope for the best, that you end up with a job afterwards. But their commitment essentially ends when you walk out their door, and that's when they usually reach out in order to ask for a donation. And how many people have gotten that solicitation from their alma mater? Probably all of us. And so what we decided was that when someone got into MissionU, we would charge them absolutely no tuition up front. And instead, we would invest in them throughout the course of their entire year at MissionU. And at the end of that year, only if and when they were making at least $50,000 or more, they would contribute back 15% of their income for 3 years. And then that would be the end of their obligation. And so it's an entirely outcomes-based model. And we said, something when it comes to designing curriculum, most colleges kind of oftentimes are very separated from the business world, right? We said we should absolutely partner with the business world. This is what students want. 91% of today's freshmen say they're going to college to get a better job. And so before we ever started recruiting students, we were speaking to world-class companies. And they've deeply advised us on curriculum. Everything that we teach our students goes through the lens of employer partners evaluating, assessing, and advising. The second is we would create content, so we have guest speakers nonstop for our students. They oftentimes go on site to actual companies to get that real-world experience. So all of our employer partners get first cut at this incredible pipeline of talent. And as of now, these partners include companies like Spotify, Lyft, Uber, Warby Parker, Casper, Harry's, et cetera, with a bunch more to be announced shortly, and hopefully Google at some point as well. And so what I figured would actually be helpful is to walk you through a little bit of how we've integrated Google's technology. Being here on campus, you guys have been an incredible provider of the technology that actually powers a lot of our student experience. We use blended learning. We think that's really the future of education, which is a hybrid of both online, which is live primarily for our students, as well as in person. We think that a lot of students can learn very well online, in particular technical skills, but those soft skills and those relationships that you create with your cohort mates really have to be facilitated in person. So our students come together at minimum every other week. A lot of them actually live together because you have to live within 50 miles of your cohort city. And then, finally, I figured I'd just share a little bit of what our year looks like. The first trimester is a deep dive into what we consider foundational skills, a mix of both hard skills and soft skills, a lot of things that come out of Stanford on the soft skill and holistic development side, a lot of things that come out of places like Bain, where I started my career, as well as some of the instruction from top data scientists and our instructors, as well as advisors come from places like Harvard and Stanford and MIT. Second trimester is a deep dive into your major. Right now we offer one, which is data analytics and business intelligence. Over time we'll layer in many more. And then the final trimester is actually real world work experience, either internships, fellowships, or consulting projects so that they can complete the year with the actual competency that they want to enter the workforce with. So with that, I guess we'll kind of dive into a little bit of a conversation, but if anybody wants to follow up or get involved in any capacity, this is just my email and I'll leave it up there as we chat.
Cool. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Really appreciate you being here and for the Google plug. So I want to kind of just bring it back for a second and just provide a little bit of context for the audience. Talk about your childhood. You talked about the inflection point between Pencils of Promise and MissionU. I'd love to hear you focus on the inflection point between the kind of overachieving, kind of typical path of hedge fund, Bain, to Pencils of Promise.
Sure. I had a good childhood. I mean, a great one. My parents are amazing. So now I have 14-month-old twins at home. And so my parents have suddenly never become smarter in my life. And I've never gone to them for more advice than since becoming a parent myself. But, they're both very loving. My dad's an immigrant, came here when he was 3, child of 2 Holocaust survivors. And my mother's father passed away when she was quite young, when she was about 11. And so I think that even though we had this great upbringing, my dad's a dentist, my mom's an orthodontist, and so, you know, I don't think that we felt any sense of, you know, hey, we're impoverished. But, you know, I'd look around in the town that we grew up in, which is Greenwich, Connecticut, and there were certainly people with way more than what we had. And so I was always aware of that juxtaposition that, you know, we were fine, but there was a lot more to be achieved. But I think, you know, having the recognition that your grandparents lost everything, including family members and every possession in the Holocaust, there was this kind of mentality, I guess, just ingrained in us. This is kind of like immigrant mentality of you got to work for everything that you're going to go out and achieve. And so, you know, in the teenage mind, it was go out and make a lot of money, and hedge funds and kind of the world of finance was the best way to accomplish that. And so that was the path I was on. But when I was 21, I went on semester at sea and just had this series of life-changing experiences through exposure to the developing world. And I realized, you know, the actual purpose for my life is to try and bring as much positivity and well-being into the world as I can, and you know, enabling others to reach their full potential, which education, I believe, does most, is the path that I've pursued since then.
And how would you advise somebody who's maybe in that situation where they're kind of on the linear path towards success to break out of it? Is it kind of, you know, getting out there and seeing the undeveloped world, or?
You know, my advice has always been that true self-discovery begins where your comfort zone ends. And so, you know, the surest way to get to that place where you feel most alive, where you have this deep ingrained sense of purpose, is by leaving your current comfort zone. And for some, it's physical relocation, you know, go traveling, you go on a trip to a kind of remote part of the world. But I don't think that's necessary. I mean, in other capacities, it's changing the relationships around you. It's changing what your day-to-day actual kind of routine looks like. You know, exposure to new hobbies that you never thought that you'd actually be interested in. All of those things, I think, help us get unstuck from kind of what we are and what people and society and norms dictate we're supposed to be into who we truly are. And then the final thing is I think you can just learn from the template of others before you, and so that means reading books. I listen to a ton of podcasts, and a lot of those podcasts are just interviews. On my way here today, I was listening to an interview with the founder of Patagonia, and it was just so inspiring for me over the last hour or so, hearing how different this person's path was and the decisions that he's made historically, and it helped me reframe the way that I might want to dictate some of the decisions in my life as well.
And I want to touch on Pencils of Promise briefly. I want to focus on MissionU today. But where is Pencils of Promise at? How involved are you? And what's the plan for it going forward?
Sure. So Pencils of Promise is at about 130 full-time staff globally, operating in 4 different countries, New York being the headquarter, but the vast majority of our staff is from the countries in which they work. They're Ghanaian, they're Lao, they're Guatemalan. We do have 20 schools in Nicaragua that we built originally. We decided not to continue expanding there, so we support that through a partnership on the ground. We had our single biggest growth year ever in 2017, which is hugely exciting. And my role is founder and board emeritus, which means that I'm still involved, but not on a day-to-day active basis. Decisions don't need to go through me in order to be made and executed, but I tend to be kind of the lightning rod for inbound interest. People will read the book and they'll reach out, and then I can funnel those relationships to the organization. I still host our annual gala, which this past year raised over $2 million in a night. So I'm still very involved, but not on a day-to-day full-time role, whereas most of my kind of day-to-day thinking is on MissionU.
We have over $1 trillion in student debt in this country. It might
1.4 trillion.
1.4 trillion, which is crazy. I remember reading a blog post maybe in 2008 or 9 by Mark Cuban, actually kind of comparing student debt issue to the housing bubble, saying we have an education bubble because students literally are taking out all this money and they can't flip it for a profit, just like you would flip a home for a profit. How exactly is MissionU solving this?
You know, from spending all the time focused on international education, one thing that I've really seen and absorbed is that in order to create systemic change, you need 2 things to happen. The first is you need innovation, right? And that innovation, if you've read Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, it occurs on the fringes, right? It's not mainstream. It's kind of these outside smaller players that start out really small, and they're so small, and they're working on something kind of so unique that your large incumbents literally don't even pay attention, even though if they had replicated, they could have squashed them. And what oftentimes occurs in systemic change is that as that innovator on the fringe gets demonstration of success, what you actually need is widespread policy adoption and advocacy that leads to scaled impact. And so my goal, in particular when it comes to MissionU, is for us to be that innovator on the fringe that demonstrates success and then eventually has policy adoption at the national level. And then essentially what the US does, a lot of countries obviously follow. So a small example would be the fact that we're using 100% income share agreement rather than traditional tuition. The fact that we're doing that is putting a lot of pressure on traditional colleges to respond. And my hope is I don't expect to see every college be 100% ISA, income share agreement, but what I do expect to see is for colleges to be expected to start to have some skin in the game, and eventually for policy to actually mandate that. For students not to be required to pay back until they reach a certain threshold, which is actually the national policy in countries like Australia, as well as this blended learning model to be demonstrated as a proof point by us. There's other companies that are doing it and doing it with great success, and for then that to get adopted by a lot of the mainstream incumbents as well as policy.
Now, you started out with Pencils of Promise kind of focusing on accessibility and getting as many students around the world kind of educated as possible. Peter Thiel talks about the current college education system, and he says it's almost like a nightclub. Like if you expand it and allow more people in, they'll be very angry because basically it's their bread and butter is prestige.
Exclusivity is key.
Exactly, exclusivity. So how do you reconcile those two things? It's this social credential where prestige is maybe semi-important, along with accessibility and reaching as many people as possible.
Yeah, so this is a big thing for us, and it's currently a challenge that we're addressing through scale. So, we launched March 2017. We said we're open. This is MissionU. No one had, really had any public exposure to it. And we asked everyone that knew about it to not talk about it until we were ready to launch. We launched March 21st, 2017, and we said, this is MissionU. You can apply as of today. And we spent no money on any form of paid marketing. And we said, we just want to see organically what happens. I did interviews and podcasts and stuff, and press picked it up, but we did no targeted marketing. So we allowed the message to spread to the places where it might spread naturally. And we said, we have 25 spots per cohort. We'll just see how many people apply. And we had 4,700 applicants for the first 25 spots in about 2.5-month period. And we said, oh my gosh, there's some lightning in a bottle here. And our goal is that to be the most exclusive, selective higher education program in the country, which statistically we are right now. We have essentially a 0.5% acceptance rate. We don't want to be that, but we are at the moment. And so we said, one, we need to go out and raise more capital so that we can offer additional cohorts. We don't want to change the cohort size. We think about 25 is the best number for people to build those tight relationships, to have the right ratio to instructors. But we needed to have additional times in the year when people could apply, concurrently launch cohorts at the same time in the same cities, expand to new cities, as well as offer new majors. So we went out, we raised another round of capital from some incredible people, and then we opened up admissions for January. We said, okay, you can apply for January, and we had 5,500 people apply for those spots, and now we're running admissions for May, and so again, we acknowledge that this is a real challenge in higher ed, and our goal is to try and scale quickly to serve that need, but at the same time, we want to create a truly world-class, high-quality experience for every student, and we know that we need to start slowly and test out this model, and once it's really tightly refined on the curricular side, on the student experience side, then scale really, really rapidly. I mean, our goal is to serve tens of thousands of students, ideally be larger than any current college in the country.
Awesome. What does a real-world approach mean? You guys talk about kind of teaching practical skills as opposed to maybe more theoretical ones.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, it means having a really tight pulse on what's happening in industry. So designing and building curriculum in a vacuum, having it go through a 3 to 4 year accreditation process, and then saying, you should go learn this, as all of you, I'm sure, experience on a day-to-day basis here at a place like Google, is going to leave you well behind what's actually needed to solve the needs of industry. So part of it is having these deep relationships with folks at companies to understand what's needed to actually hit the ground running. The second is, I think, a profound acknowledgement that you need to bring that real world into the curricular design. And so, as I mentioned, we have I mean, I went to a great college, and I loved my experience, but I don't think more than once did I ever get exposure to a public speaker who came in and addressed a class that I was in that actually was working at a company. It was so rare. And so for our students, I mean, you know, last week the global head of artist marketing at Spotify spent an hour just with a group of 30 students. And that's like on a weekly basis, a top tier person comes in and addresses them. But then the second is actually teaching them things that are going to be applicable to getting a great job, to navigating their personal life as well. So we teach personal finance. I mean, how many people here got like a deep introduction to personal finance, how you actually navigate, you know, your financial scenario once you leave the bounds of your educational experience? I mean, everyone's nodding their head no. So things like that. We have you know, a class that we call Success by Design, which is really about finding your internal happiness, where you want to point your compass in life, and why. You know, all of those things I think are applicable to a real-world context. And then finally, our students work on projects that are based on real-world scenarios. So we'll get, you know, dummy data from real companies that are facing a real challenge. Our students will work through that, produce a final project, and then after they ship it, they can, one, publicly present it as part of their portfolio, but oftentimes they actually get to present it to somebody who's worked on that real project at that real company, and they get that cycle of feedback. And then the final part is just the back third of the year is actually working full-time at a great company or organization, and then getting additional curricular support from us throughout that process.
Yeah, one of the perks we have here at Google is we get to kind of like speak to financial advisors, and I think this was my first job out of school, and like I didn't know anything. Yeah. And I think most people don't know anything. They don't know what a 401k is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we teach our students is salary negotiation. And I remember sitting with a reporter from a major media company explaining that, and she was in her mid-30s, and she said, geez, I wish I got that. And so we think it's important. And our students range from 18 to 39, you know. Some of them have transferred in from top-tier colleges. Some of them have bachelor's degrees. Most of them have some type of college, but not a BA yet, and are looking out and saying, why would I take on this much more debt to get this piece of paper that isn't actually going to be of greatest value, whereas MissionU will be.
There seems to be a special interest right now on learning how to learn. That's actually the most popular course on Coursera right now. Barbara Oakley teaches it. Do you guys incorporate kind of the most recent kind of neuroscientific findings and findings about just how to learn and how cognition kind of happens in MissionU?
Yeah, this is the obsession of my co-founder, Mike. So Mike's our chief product officer, and he oversees both curriculum and technology. He's a world-class software engineer as well. So all the stuff that you were seeing on Google, he's overseen and designed with Jen, who you heard. Yeah, I mean, if you saw the Slack channels of our team, like you would just think these people are the biggest education nerds in the world. So yeah, we obsess and kind of geek out over that stuff. And then, you know, we have incredible advisors like Dr. Tony Wagner from Harvard, or from Mandelbaum for his lecture at Stanford. And so we're constantly kind of digging into the latest learning science. You know, part of that applies into how the actual structure of the program looks. So for example, we tell every student so one thing that I'll share is I actually call every student when they get in. So the actual admissions acceptance is me calling them kind of as a surprise. And you know, they always answer and tell, hi, who's calling? And I say, it's Adam Braun from MissionU. And then they're like, oh, hi, how's it going? What's up? And then I'll say, how's your day? And they say, it's good. And I'll say, okay, well, hopefully it's a lot better, because I wanted to share with you that you got it. And they're all excited. And then I kind of walk them through, hey, here's the next steps. Here's your orientation date. We'll send you email and repeat a lot of this stuff so you have it in writing. But I want to get them comfortable with a couple of the high-level details. And one thing I share is that you can work a part-time job while you're going through our program, but you can't exceed 20 hours a week. And that's grounded in learning science that shows that if you exceed 20 hours a week of a job while you're trying to focus on a primary academic commitment, your success in that program really falls off the map. So things like that are applicable for us.
And kind of reconciling teaching practical skills and emphasizing that with just a liberal arts education to begin with. I can imagine where you kind of fall on that, but you know, there are people like Fareed Zakaria who talk about the loss of like liberal arts education in the country. I went to Columbia, and I'm still trying to figure out whether, you know, reading Plato like helps me every day. But yeah, where do you kind of stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, my belief on this is very firm. I think there is tremendous value in the ideals behind a liberal arts education. So self-discovery, critical thinking, reasoning, morality, all of these things are really, really essential as part of a formative education. The problem is those things are actually not taught in a meaningful capacity in the vast majority of liberal arts programs in this country. What liberal arts has kind of become is general education, where you're just asked to read a series of texts and suddenly you're supposed to be expected to achieve these things. So some schools do it well, but very few. The two places that I think that it's best achieved are through two courses that are taught at Stanford. One is called Designing Your Life. It's the most popular class in undergrad at Stanford. And then the second is called Interpersonal Dynamics, taught at Stanford GSB, but known as Touchy-Feely. And if anyone here has gone to GSB or knows someone that's gone to GSB, this is the course that they will say is the most transformative in their life. And so we actually have former lecturers from those two courses who are full-time on staff at MissionU. And our students go through something that is very, very similar. We call it iLabs, or similar to the T groups there. And when you mix that with the hard technical skills, that's actually when you create a really profound transformation in an individual. So I think it's important that we incorporate the ideals of the liberal arts, but that you mix it with the actual hard and soft skills that will help somebody get a job, right, to pay back the debt that they've taken on if they've gone to a traditional liberal arts school. And we really seek to blend that at MissionU.
So is that really how you kind of stay away from being like considered like a trade school? Because there are a lot of schools out there that are like, I don't like my career right now, and so I'll switch and I'll go to this school, and then it's just kind of a pivot.
Right.
Is that how you kind of stray away from that, by having these kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen is there's a lot of schools that are out there that are very effective at helping you get into a new industry and lock in a first job. That's not our goal, right? Our students only send us $1 if they're successful, not only in getting the job, but they need to be successful for 3+ years, right? And so, we want to prepare them for an extraordinary life and career ahead. And part of that is learning this hard technical skill, but actually a much bigger part is the soft skills and that holistic self-development. And if you spoke to any student that's at MissionU, they'll say that they needed one to be able to succeed in the other. That when they really hit that kind of sticking point in learning Python or SQL or Excel modeling, it's actually the group discussion that will happen in iLab that gives them the confidence and the self-awareness to be able to progress through those challenges.
Do you have kind of like a 10-year game plan for MissionU? It seems like right now you might be going kind of the Uber or Tesla model, where you start kind of premium and then you kind of widen out.
Yeah.
What's the plan?
Yeah, so one, I mean, Pencils of Promise is in its 10th year. And if you would have told me at the beginning when I was trying to build one school and riding my motorbike with a backpack and roll louse by myself that this year we'd likely break ground on our 500th school, I would have said that's insane. And so I think it's challenging to project 10 years out. That said, the ambition is certainly within 10 years for us to be in dozens of cities. Again, everyone lives within 50 miles, so they can come together frequently, but the 50-mile radius allows for more affordability than just having to be close to a downtown campus. So we'll be in dozens of cities. We'll be offering, I would imagine, 10+ majors. And I think 10 years from now, parents and children will essentially look at MissionU, and I assume others will follow our lead and create similar types of programs. And it will be a real consideration for every student that is considering college, whether they're fresh out of high school, mid-career, working adult, is do I go to one of these traditional 4 to 6 years that's a little bit outdated, or do I go through something like a MissionU? And it will just be part of the landscape of higher education.
And are you convinced that going forward a classroom is the best kind of medium or setting to learn?
I think it depends on how you define a classroom. So, a classroom does not need to have 4 physical walls around it. If I showed you, the engagement of our students, it looks like a Brady Bunch style, set of screens. Our admissions process actually replicates that through a group challenge where we have total strangers design actually on a Google Drive. We give them an ambiguous challenge, and then they actually build a presentation in Google Sheets together in 45 minutes and present it to our staff and record the whole thing on Zoom and go and watch it back. And so, I think that to me is a version of a classroom. What I would say is a medium through which individuals are able to communicate in a live, synchronous manner with intimacy and honesty is the best way to learn. It's certainly better than doing it by yourself, unless you have a direct tutor. So some type of human engagement, and that can be a classroom in sorts, you and another person. And I don't think that large lecture halls are the way to do it, but I do think that there's tremendous power in these small group cohort-based formats, in particular behind a screen where everything is being recorded and where you truly feel accountable.
I want to move on to you briefly before we open it up to Q&A. Are there kind of habits or philosophies that kind of help you just perform at a high level every day?
Sure. I mean, this has evolved. You know, in my 20s, it was like just put in as much work as I can and try and respond to everything as fast as I can, and you know, make the most of every opportunity. And like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. You know, that was kind of my approach. I think now in my 30s and with a wife and 2 kids, I've really learned the value of self-care. And so, for example, if I work out consistently in a given week, I mountain bike and I play basketball, then I actually perform much better in the office. If I'm able to meditate for 10 to 15 minutes before the babies are up and then my house like goes into all hell breaking loose, then I feel much more grounded throughout the day. I use an app called Captio, which allows me to just send quick notes to myself, and my inbox tends to be my to-do list, and so I try and practice inbox 0 or some form of it. And then the other, I think, is just treating people the way that you would want to be treated, right? Building a culture that really values people, not just as numbers on your Excel sheet of headcount roadmaps or your org chart, and really focus on growing those people into the best performing individuals that they can, and the best people that they can, leads to a really rewarding work environment and something that you're excited to go into every day.
Nice. What's your why? What's the thing that drives you?
My why is quite simply that by every statistical measure, I shouldn't be here, right? I mean, my grandparents were meant to pass away in those concentration camps. If anyone's read my book, on semester at sea, my cruise ship was hit by a 60-foot rogue wave 800 miles from land, and we had this Titanic-esque experience where I was supposed to die that day, and somehow I didn't. And so I genuinely feel like this life for me is 1 in a trillion. And so I need to do everything that I can to honor that, and both leave the most positive mark that I can on as many people as possible. And now, as a new father, I realize that at the same time, I have to balance that with the fact that the greatest mark that I can leave on the world is producing great children and being a great husband and great father and sibling. So those are the 2 things for me. This kind of big scaled ambition with this very small one that I'm most happy when I'm just hanging out with my kids in their little room.
Do you have mentors or role models who've really helped you and affected you throughout?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of mentors that I've kind of gathered over the years. One of them is a guy named Ray Chambers, who is probably most responsible in the world for eradication of malaria. Became a billionaire, really started the leverage buyout space. And I was at lunch at one point with a guy named Randall Lane, who's the editor-in-chief of Forbes, and he told me that maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I can't remember how long, but he was not the editor-in-chief, but he was running the Forbes 400 kind of list as his function at the company. And Ray Chambers was on the list, and he got a call the next day after it came out, and this guy said, "How do I get off the list? I don't want to be on it." And he said, "Well, you either have to lose the money or give it away, but we're going to report it if you're that wealthy." He said, "All right, I'll be off by next year." And he committed his life to humanitarian work, and so he's been an incredible mentor. And then certainly my family members. I mean, my dad, my mom, my sister, my brother, they're the people, as well as my wife, that I talk to most about these decisions.
Speaking of your family, you have a very high-achieving family. Your Adam's brother actually manages Justin Bieber, among many other artists.
Yeah, a lot of people. Kanye and a lot of people.
That's right. Do you ever get competitive with Scooter about anything? You guys couldn't have taken more different paths. You're both very impressive people, but do you ever get competitive with him?
As kids, we were super competitive. I think by the time we both hit our kind of mid to late 20s, we realized that we were just operating in such different spaces, and the best thing that we could do is just be unbelievably proud of one another and try and support each other. I think if you went to a Saturday morning basketball game where we were playing on opposite teams, you would see us pretty competitive. But in most things, we just try and support one another as much as we can.
Awesome. Do you guys have any questions? Let's open it up for Q&A. And if you do, please go to that mic right over there.
I resonated with a lot of what you said. Thanks for speaking. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with us some things that you tried or thought that might work but ended up not working out.
Sure. I mean, at Pencils of Promise, Nicaragua was the second country that we tried to expand into. And I built a partnership with an organization there. They kind of showed me the lay of the land. We sent a small team down. And it ultimately wasn't successful for two reasons. The first was the government was incredibly challenging. You know, we need to work with supportive governments because we build public schools. The second, though, was we did this deep analysis, and the population density was very low, and the cost of materials was very high. So what we saw was it was 2 to 3x more expensive to impact the same number of lives in that country than it was in the other, eventually, 3 to 4 other countries where we were working. And that was really tough, right? I mean, you start in a country, you actually make a commitment, you build 20 schools, and then you have to say, we're not going to continue to expand and build our own teams there. That was really hard, but I think it forced an organizational discipline at Pencils of Promise, for sure. With MissionU, I mean, anyone who saw our pitch deck before there was even a company, when it was just like a seed of an idea, would tell you that the way it looks today is remarkably similar. There's only been one meaningful change, and that's that originally we said we're going to have 4 quarters. And those quarters were going to be hard skills in the first quarter, soft skills in the second, technical in the third, and then real world in the fourth. And we realized right away that you actually can't divorce hard skills from soft skills, that they need to be taught in conjunction. And so we moved over to a trimester model, where that first trimester is a deep dive on the foundation. And so a lot of it is like that lean kind of mentality to test and iterate and get feedback from your consumers.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. It's a very inspiring talk, and I think this MissionU concept is a really strong one. So I guess my general question is, this problem of crushing student debt seems to be a uniquely American problem. And I was wondering if you, during your research, you had looked at other countries and maybe could take away something like either boring stuff that you could incorporate into MissionU, or are there any, this is sort of a private sector solution to the education problem, and is there any role for the U.S. government that could lead to better reforming the education system or solving the problem in that sense?
Absolutely. So right now there's a new bill that's being formed that's probably the most significant restructuring of higher education funding in the last 40 years. So they're overhauling essentially the Higher Education Act. And there's some stuff in there that I agree with, there's some stuff that I don't. But I think directionally it's actually a move in the right direction. So one of the things is the reason that we're in the position that we're in is a series of factors. But one of the important ones that the government has enabled is that an individual can essentially take out an unlimited line of credit at a very young age without any demonstrated capacity to be able to pay that back. And we have this society that's kind of encouraged through just societal norms and expectations that you should do that. And so one thing that's happened as a result is that there's no market force that's creating downward pressure on how much colleges can charge, or any accountability to the value of that college relative to the cost. So, for example, I can think of many not very good colleges that have terrible outcomes that charge the same amount as a school like Harvard, right? And so that's like me being a car salesman and saying to you, here's this Lamborghini for $200,000, or you can get this really crappy old beat-up car that's actually not going to drive very well, but that's $200,000 as well, and you should buy this one too. So I think that the government needs to, one, hold schools accountable to outcomes, and the best way to do that is through skin in the game, some type of income share based on student success. The second is to actually realistically put a limit on how much a student can borrow. And what I think that will lead to is colleges bringing their prices down. And the result of that is that a lot of colleges are going to go out of business because they have unsustainable business models. And that's actually, I think, a very good thing. We need to have market forces in place that remove bad actors that are putting students in positions of peril. And just because you're a nonprofit college doesn't mean that you're actually helping people. And there's a lot that are actually hurting people. So skin in the game, capping total amounts that students can take out. And then the third is transparency as to how much it's actually going to cost. It's very hard if you're an 18, 19, 40-year-old and you're applying to college to actually get the clear information on how much it's eventually going to cost you, as well as the outcomes data of those colleges. It's very convoluted. They hide it. And Congress needs to really move forward with an effort to ensure greater transparency in the space.
Seems like there would be a lot of forces that would kind of be operating against those kind of reforms, like especially if colleges are at risk of going out of business.
Definitely. I mean, it's challenging because you have one of the most entrenched systems in our culture, as well as our capital allocation in the country. But what it's led to is a position that's completely unsustainable. I mean, I read a report from the Brookings Institute, which is as nonpartisan, objective, and well-researched as possible, that came out last week, that projected that 40% of today's college students will default on their loans by 2030. I mean, it's insane. So we need to have some type of really meaningful change. And as an entrepreneur, I look at problems like this and I say, you know, if not me, then who?
Thanks.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I think the problem that MissionU solves, which is about how to actually deliver education in a system which is not exactly built up for the huge population, is probably going to apply for the kind of countries in which Pencils for Promise operates in. So do you see how technology as a medium for instruction can be actually scaled to developing countries? And
oh yeah, 100%. I mean,
just finish my question. And what exactly are the challenges that are preventing it from happening as of today?
Okay, so great question. One, when I talk about that 10-year vision, I mean, when I say we'll be in dozens of cities around the world, many of them should be international. So 18% of our applicants are international. You have to have a visa to work in the US because we need to recuperate our investment in you through you know, livable wages. And so we can't take those students on currently, but we've had applicants from you know, dozens of other countries. I recently gave a talk in Singapore about this, and the main question from all these representatives of different countries was, how soon can this come here? And so we certainly have ambitions to scale globally. I think, you know, right now part of the challenge is the ability to deliver live synchronous education over low bandwidth internet, but that's increasing exponentially every single day, right? So I actually spent a full year in 2015. I was leading the largest digital initiative called the Global Education Platform for the UN Special Envoy for Education, which is Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK. And in that year, what I spent, you know, observing and seeing was this huge proliferation of mobile across the developing world. And so what I would see at scale is people being able to actually have these experiences on mobile in the types of environments where, you know, Pencils of Promise has historically worked.
Hi, my name is Terry. I'm from China. We are facing the same issue in China, if it's not worse. So I'm truly inspired by your talk today, and thank you for sharing and for your great work. My question is simple. If that model works for MissionU, do you think it might work for high school as well? Because I see no point now if we go to college, pay expensive tuition and learn nothing, but high school is preparing for that entry examination and for nothing. That 4 years are greatly wasted. So maybe we can even start younger and without wasting any time and inject hope in these children's eyes and in their hearts.
Yeah, I think our curricular approach certainly can be adopted at the high school level. I don't know about the income share agreement because, you know, some people do want to work directly at the end of high school. But, you know, I think the curricular approach certainly can be adopted by public and private schools. The kind of project-based and certainly the blended learning, the technology can and should be used in that capacity as well.
And one more, if I may.
Go for it.
If the compensation, or the payback part is not only measured by the income, what else it could be for your success in the school?
You know, for us, there's also what we would consider NPS, so Net Promoter Score. That's actually just as critical in our minds. We need, you know, to create an environment in which our students are the single greatest evangelists of our program, and eventually they become really the stewards for additional innovation within education. It's what you've seen with Teach for America, for example, is, you know, they've certainly seen success. They've also had controversy, but directionally incredible success. And not only the success within the schools in which they've taught, but, you know, their alums have gone out and become stewards for an incredible amount of new initiatives that have had a truly global impact. And that for us is absolutely critical to long-term success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I mean, it's really an honor to be here. And as I alluded to, Google really powers a lot of what we do without even a formalized partnership in place, just by the tools and technology that you all have built. But we're really excited to hopefully build something even more powerful with you all. And to the extent that anyone's interested, please just email me. We'd love to, whether it's, you know, kind of be a case study or even just a guinea pig for new things that you guys are developing, because we have a team that's really eager to work with folks like you all to bring more successful and outcomes-driven education to people all around the world.
And we have some books as well if you want to stick around and pick those up. Everybody, please give a round of applause for Adam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.